Obviously, this is a pretty personal video and very different to my others, so if you decide to skip this one and wait for the next, I totally understand. But probably a lot of us used to play video games with people who are no longer with us, and maybe there'll be something here you can identify with. And what with it nearly being Christmas, I've been remembering all the Christmases of my childhood with my family, and often with a new game or even a new system plugged into the TV, so it's a time for fond recollections of past happiness. Which makes this about as close to a Christmas video as you're gonna get from a Scrooge like me. Anyway, a little over 15 years ago, my mother died after a brief struggle with lung cancer. I've talked a little bit about my family before, but to summarise, my father died when I was very young, so my mother was left to raise me alone. She had some help from her adult children from her first marriage, but essentially she was a sole parent and I was an only child. So life wasn't always easy for us, but thanks to her hard work and diligence, I had a very happy childhood. And of course a big part of that childhood was playing video games. The first ever game I remember playing was Moon Patrol on an arcade machine in the local fish and chip shop. I actually did a video about that game not that long ago. But it was only a few years later when I got my first PC, an Amstrad that was basically obsolete even before we bought it, that my mother started taking an interest in gaming too. I've also talked a bit before about how we tried as a family to puzzle our way through Sierra games like King's Quest IV and Space Quest III, as well as the LucasArts classics Zack McCracken and the Alien Mindbenders. We spent ages on that one without making much progress. Eventually my mother took the unusual step of placing an ad in the local paper, asking for help from anyone who'd played the game before. We actually got a reply, and a young man came round to our place and showed us how to get past the bit we were stuck on. We should perhaps have retained his services because we almost instantly got stuck again. Eventually we ended up sending off to the United States for a hint book, not only for Zack McCracken but for all the Sierra games we'd never managed to figure out as well. To people born and raised in the internet age, the idea of a hint book, a physical item we had to pay a not insubstantial amount of money for and get it shipped halfway around the planet, may seem ridiculous. And the idea of taking out a classified ad must seem absolutely ludicrous, although to be fair that was unusual even by the standards of the day. But those were the lengths my mother was prepared to go to in order to make sure we saw those games through to the end. She played a little bit of Where in Time is Carmen Sandiego. I can't imagine that an educational game designed for children did much to stretch her considerable intellect, but it kept her amused for a little while at least. I chiefly remember that game because of the time I accidentally erased her save game file, and then, racked with guilt, erased mine as well. A futile gesture that she would not have wanted, but I remember it seemed very important to me at the time. And it was definitely a sacrifice. You only got to hunt down Carmen herself every 40 games from memory, so I had to start that climb again. In some ways, my mother was a much more hardcore gamer than I was, at least in those days. We got Prince of Persia when it was fairly new and it became my next gaming obsession. But while I was content to just run around its complex levels and hack people to death with a sword, my mother hit upon the idea of speedrunning decades before it became really popular. Prince of Persia has a 1 hour time limit to finish the game, and once she'd achieved that goal, she set about seeing just how quickly she could reach the end. She must have spent months whittling down a time by a minute here, 30 seconds there. I can't remember exactly what her best time was, I think it was around 30 minutes. By comparison, modern speedrunners can complete the game in well under 20 minutes, so she wasn't exactly on world record pace, but it was a hell of a lot better than I ever managed. When she set herself a goal in a game, she could be incredibly determined and single-minded. For instance, she absolutely loved Sonic the Hedgehog on the Mega Drive, but the impossibly specific thing she loved about it was trying to get as many rings as possible in the first act. She rarely played any further than just that first act, and I don't think she ever actually finished the game. Instead, she spent hours just playing through that one level, refining a strategy, getting every ring she could manage, then resetting and trying again. This one particular jump was her nemesis. She practiced so hard to get the bouncing on the enemies just right. I've also talked about the Lemmings addiction that swept through my family like a plague. Check out my video on that game if you want to know more. But that was another game that my mother tackled with determination that bordered on sheer stubbornness. I don't know how many hours she spent on that game while I was at school, but I know it was a lot. A hell of a lot. And then there was Doom. Yes, I wasn't the only Doom fanatic in my family. Well, this was a game where I was definitely more obsessed than my mother ever was, but once I got the PlayStation version, she did play it a great deal and loved it. She didn't do any speedrunning of this game, she just enjoyed it for the same reasons I did, the exploration, the intense carnage, and the disquieting atmosphere. I remember being strangely proud of her, a nearly 60-year-old woman at that time, a grandmother, happily playing a game that other grandmothers were denouncing as satanic, or a cause of violence in young people, or a sign of moral decay. I honestly regret that I never got the chance to deathmatch against her. I think I probably would have beaten her, but I'm not entirely sure. It wasn't too long after that I moved away to uni, taking all my gaming stuff with me, and she never really got properly into another game after that. She did occasionally play the PC version of Lemmings when I tracked down a copy some years later, but the obsession had faded. I guess she was ultimately an opportunist gamer, someone who found herself getting wrapped up in games that happened to cross her path, but not really someone who sought them out. I was the reason she played games, and I guess it was a way for us to share an interest and some time together. Gaming's pretty good for that. So yes, we had some good times back in the day. I don't want to get too sentimental, and I don't think I need to. You've probably got your own memories of your parents, or maybe even of being a parent, so you know what I'm talking about. Or maybe you're lucky enough to still have your parents around, in which case I strongly advise you to challenge them to a deathmatch, or a game of Fortnite, or whatever the cool kids and their parents are doing these days. Well, I hope you'll excuse me for this brief but rather self-indulgent video. Let me know in the comments what fond memories you hold of gaming with your parents, or just your family in general, and if it's something you still get to do. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, it does really help. Until next time though, get off my lawn.